In the heart of Nigeria, a prophetess known as Mama See-It-All held thousands in her grip with claims of divine power. But beneath her holy facade lurked a terrifying secret. At midnight, she would transform into a serpentine creature, slithering into the depths of a dark underwater kingdom. This is the true story of how one woman's courage exposed the most shocking religious scandal of our time. Thunder crackled outside the massive hall of Holy Ground Ministries as rain lashed against its stained glass windows. Inside, hundreds of desperate souls pressed shoulder to shoulder to shoulder, their necks craning to catch a glimpse of the woman they called Mama See-It-All. The air was thick with anticipation and the cloying scent of incense. Prophetess Patricia glided onto the stage, her white flowing robe seeming to catch light from an unseen source. Her presence commanded attention, and the whispers that had filled the hall moments before died to reverent silence. Some said she could peer into a person's soul, revealing secrets no mortal could know. Others swore she spoke directly with God. But today something felt different in the air, a heaviness that went beyond the storm outside. The congregation watched, mesmerized, as Patricia raised her bejeweled hands toward the ceiling. Her voice, rich and authoritative, filled every corner of the vast space. "The Spirit is moving today," she declared, her eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that made people shrink back in their seats. Just then, a scream pierced the air. Agatha, one of Mama's trusted aides, rushed forward from the side of the hall, her eyes wide with excitement. "She did it again." "Mama healed him," she shouted, pointing to a man who was now standing from his wheelchair, taking tentative steps across the stage. The congregation erupted in cheers and hallelujahs. People jumped to their feet, hands raised in praise, some speaking in tongues while others wept openly at witnessing what they believed to be a miracle. Money began flowing into the collection baskets as grateful believers showed their appreciation for this display of divine power. But in the midst of the chaos, Elizabeth sat quietly in her usual spot near the back, her heart growing heavy with each passing moment. Her hands clenched in her lap as she watched the scene unfold. Just 3 days ago, she had seen that same crippled man walking freely through the market, haggling over the price of yams with the local traders. There had been no wheelchair then, no sign of disability, just a man going about his daily business. Doubt clawed at her chest as she observed Mama See-It-All basking in the adoration of her followers. The prophetess's smile never wavered, but Elizabeth caught something else in those eyes, a calculated gleam that seemed more predatory than prophetic. Yet who would believe her? Mama See-It-All was untouchable, her influence extending far beyond the church walls into the highest levels of society. Her followers would fight tooth and nail to protect her reputation, and Elizabeth had seen what happened to those who dared question the prophetess's authority. As the service continued and the storm raged outside, Elizabeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She was beginning to understand that she had stumbled upon something dark lurking beneath the surface of Holy Ground Ministry, something that would test not only her faith but her courage as well. Long before she became Mama See-It-All, Patricia was just a simple girl from a humble family in a small Nigerian village. Her parents were pillars of their local church, known for their unwavering faith and generous hearts despite their modest means. Every Sunday morning, young Patricia would wake before dawn to help her mother press her best dress, the faded cotton smoothed carefully for church service. In those early days, Patricia's smile was genuine, her faith pure as mountain spring water. She was the kind of child who would give away her last sweet to a crying friend, the one who stayed after Sunday school to help stack the wooden chairs and sweep the dusty floor. Her voice, clear and strong, would soar above the church choir, carrying prayers heavenward while elderly church members nodded in approval. "That girl," they would whisper, "she has been touched by God's own hand." During prayer meetings, Patricia would lead with such conviction that even adults found themselves moved to tears. She organized youth programs, teaching younger children Bible verses with patience and creativity. Each weekend, she would gather the neighborhood children under the mango tree behind the church, acting out biblical stories with such vivid detail that even the most restless children sat transfixed. But as Patricia grew older, something began to shift within her heart. The genuine joy of service gradually gave way to a gnawing ambition. She watched visiting preachers command attention, saw how congregants pressed crisp notes into their hands, noticed the shiny cars they drove. The simple satisfaction of leading Sunday school no longer seemed enough. When Patricia announced her calling to start her own ministry, her parents beamed with pride, imagining their daughter following in the footsteps of the humble pastors they had always known. They scraped together their savings, selling her mother's prized sewing machine to rent a small room for services. Those first months were brutal. Patricia would stand on street corners, inviting passers-by to attend her services, only to preach to empty chairs. Some days only 3 people would show up: her parents and the janitor who cleaned the building. The offering basket would come back with only cobwebs and copper coins, barely enough to keep the lights on. Night after night, Patricia would kneel on the cold floor of her rented room, prayers turning from humble requests to desperate demands. "Lord, I've given everything," she would whisper, her voice cracking. "Why won't you make me great?" But God's answer seemed too slow in coming. The congregation wasn't growing fast enough. The breakthrough she preached about seemed to manifest for everyone except her. As her frustration grew, so did her desperation. When whispers reached her about a conference where successful pastors would share their secrets, Patricia saw her chance. She didn't know then that this decision would mark the beginning of her descent from a pure-hearted servant to something far more sinister. If only someone had told young Patricia that some prayers are better left unanswered. The conference hall buzzed with the energy of 1,000 aspiring pastors, all seeking the secret to building mega churches. Patricia sat in the back row, her worn Bible clutched to her chest, watching as successful preachers took the stage one by one. Their suits were crisp, their watches gold, their promises of prosperity falling like honey on eager ears. It was during the evening break when Pastor Benji found her. He moved like a shadow, his cologne heavy in the air, as he settled into the seat beside her. His eyes held a peculiar gleam as he studied her face. "You have potential," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "but you're trying too hard to be godly. Tell me, sister, are you willing to do whatever it takes to make a real impact?" Patricia hesitated, her fingers tracing the cross pendant at her neck. "What do you mean?" Pastor Benji leaned closer, his whispers painting pictures of packed congregations, unlimited wealth, and power beyond imagination. He spoke of a special ceremony, a deeper anointing that required a significant sacrifice. The greater the sacrifice, he said, the greater the power. That night, Patricia followed him to a secluded building on the outskirts of town. The room was lit by black candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on walls covered in strange symbols. Other pastors stood in a circle, their familiar faces from the conference now transformed by the eerie light. "Your womb," Pastor Benji announced, his voice echoing in the chamber. "That is the sacrifice required. Your ability to bear children in exchange for power that will make nations bow." Patricia's heart thundered in her chest. The thought of never having children sent a sharp pain through her soul. Yet the promise of power, of finally achieving the greatness she craved, proved stronger than her fear. The ritual began at midnight. Chants filled the air as Patricia knelt in the center of the circle. Strange words flowed from her lips, words she didn't understand but felt burning in her blood. The room grew colder and darkness seemed to seep from the very walls. Then came the pain, a searing agony that felt like ice spreading through her veins. Patricia screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. She felt something fundamental shifting within her, as if her very essence was being rewritten. In that moment, she knew there would be no going back. When it was over, Patricia stood on shaky legs, but something was different. Power hummed beneath her skin like electricity. She could feel the thoughts and fears of those around her, taste their desperation on her tongue. A dark cloak of authority settled over her shoulders, heavy with promise and possibility. Pastor Benji smiled, his teeth gleaming in the candlelight. "Welcome to your new life, sister. You've made the right choice." As Patricia left the building that night, her old self remained behind, sacrificed on the altar of ambition. In her place walked something else, a being whose hunger for power would never be satisfied. The transformation of Mama, see it all, had begun. As the clock struck midnight, Patricia stood at the edge of the river behind her mansion, her silk robe rippling in the moonlight. The water called to her, a siren song that only she could hear. This was her true sanctuary, far from the adoring crowds and desperate believers who filled her church. Her transformation began slowly, at first a shimmer across her skin like oil on water. Then, As the moon reached its peak, her body began to change. Scales erupted across her flesh, gleaming with an iridescent sheen that caught the starlight. Her legs melded together, forming a powerful serpentine tail, while her eyes took on a vertical slit, glowing with an otherworldly amber light. This was the price and the reward of her covenant with the marine kingdom. Every midnight she would shed her human facade and return to the underwater realm where her true allegiance lay. The water parted like silk as she slipped beneath the surface, descending into depths no mortal could survive. In the ethereal glow of the underwater palace, other transformed beings awaited her arrival. They were her true brothers and sisters, now pastors, prophets, and spiritual leaders who had made the same dark bargain. Some bore the features of ancient sea creatures, others had morphed into beings that defied description. All of them had traded their humanity for power. At the center of their gathering sat the Marine Queen, a towering figure whose beauty was as terrifying as it was mesmerizing. Her lower body was that of a massive serpent, while her torso remained hauntingly human. Crown-like horns spiraled from her head, and her eyes held the wisdom of centuries. "Welcome home, my child," the Queen's voice resonated through the water, reaching directly into Patricia's mind. "Tell me of your harvests above." Patricia smiled, her now forked tongue flicking between sharp teeth. She spoke of the souls she had ensnared, the wealth she had accumulated, and the power she wielded over her congregation. Each testimony was a tribute to the dark powers that had given her this new life. The Marine Queen bestowed her gifts generously, the power to peer into human lives, to manipulate their deepest fears, to craft visions that would keep them bound to her will. With each visit, Patricia's powers grew stronger, but so did her inhuman nature. When she returned to the surface world each dawn, she carried with her the dark wisdom shared in those underwater gatherings. Her prophecies were no longer mere guesses, but insights stolen from the very souls of her followers. The mirrors she distributed throughout her congregation served as windows for her serpentine eyes, allowing her to spy on their most intimate moments. Yet even as she reveled in her power, Patricia knew the truth. She was no longer the humble preacher's daughter who had once sung in the church choir. She had become something else entirely, a creature of two worlds, belonging fully to neither. But as she watched her empire grow and felt the dark power coursing through her veins, she decided it was worth the price. After all, in the Marine Kingdom, she was more than just Mama See It All, she was royalty. From her golden throne-like chair on the altar, Mama See It All orchestrated her empire of deception with the precision of a master conductor. Her latest scheme, the mirrors of life, had proven to be her most brilliant yet. "These mirrors," she proclaimed one Sunday morning, her voice carrying through the packed hall, "are blessed by God Himself. Through them, you will see the parts of your spirit that need healing." She held up a simple hand mirror, its surface catching the light as ushers distributed identical ones to the congregation. What her devoted followers didn't know was that these weren't ordinary mirrors. Each one was connected to the Marine Kingdom's dark powers, allowing Patricia to peer into their homes, watching their private moments, gathering secrets to fuel her prophecies. Mrs. Adebayo's marital troubles, Mr. Johnson's gambling addiction, Sister Mary's secret affair all became weapons in Patricia's arsenal of manipulation. The financial exploitation ran deeper still. Every Sunday, tables lined the church entrance, laden with bottles of holy water and small vials of miracle oil. Their labels bore Patricia's image, promising everything from fertility to financial breakthrough. In truth, they were nothing more than tap water and cheap cooking oil, marked up 1,000-fold. "The price represents your faith," Patricia would declare, watching as desperate believers emptied their savings. God's response to sacrifice, the mandatory offerings, grew more elaborate, special seeds for specific blessings, emergency deliverances that required urgent financial intervention, and thanksgiving offerings that were anything but voluntary. But it was the staged miracles that truly showcased Patricia's theatrical genius. Every week brought a new performance, carefully orchestrated to maintain her grip on the congregation's faith. In a small room behind the church, she briefed her paid actors: today's blind, a man who would miraculously receive sight, tomorrow's cripple who would dramatically throw away their crutches. Remember, she instructed a young man who would play the role of a deaf mute: wait until I say heaven's frequency before you start hearing, and make it convincing, cry if you can. The congregation never suspected that the same healed people rotated through different branches of her church, playing different roles each time. The wheelchair miracle in Lagos would become the cancer healing in Abuja, then the deliverance from madness in Port Harcourt. Between services, Patricia counted her growing wealth in her private office, surrounded by gold-plated furniture and expensive art. The mirrors on her walls reflected not just her image, but the faces of countless believers whose faith she had twisted into a profitable enterprise. Yet beneath her satisfied smile lay a hunger that could never be satisfied. Each scheme bred another. Each deception demanded a grander performance. The Marine Kingdom's powers demanded constant tribute, and Patricia's empire of lies grew ever larger to feed it. As she prepared for another service, adjusting her designer clothes and practiced smile, Patricia caught her own reflection in one of her cursed mirrors. For a brief moment, her true serpentine nature flickered in the glass, a reminder of the monster she had become in her pursuit of power. Here's a 500-word story focusing on the key incidents. The Sunday Obora walked into Holy Ground Ministries marked one of Patricia's most calculated performances. She spotted him immediately, a young graduate freshly returned from overseas, accompanied by his anxious mother. Perfect prey. Young man, Patricia's voice cut through the worship songs like a blade. The Lord is showing me something about you. Come forward. Obora hesitated, but his mother's gentle push propelled him toward the altar. The congregation fell silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Patricia circled him slowly, her long white robe sweeping the floor. I see your life battery, she announced, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. It's dangerously low. Without intervention, you won't see your 30th birthday. She paused, allowing the horrified gasps from the congregation to echo through the hall. Obora's mother clutched her chest, tears already streaming down her face. Mama, please help my son. Please. Patricia's lips curved into a subtle smile. The Lord shows me the solution. A special sacrifice is needed, a cow. Not just any cow, but one without blemish. She watched, understanding dawn in their eyes. This would be expensive. When Obora mentioned not knowing where to find such a cow, Patricia smoothly offered the convenient solution, a monetary equivalent paid directly to the church. His mother practically pushed him to write the check, her face etched with desperate relief as she thanked Patricia profusely for saving her son's life. But it was the manipulation of Mr. OK that truly showcased Patricia's ruthless genius. A wealthy businessman with a loving wife of 20 years, he became her target after she noticed his expensive watch and luxury car. During a Sunday service, Patricia pointed him out. Brother OK, the Lord shows me a dark cloud over your household. Her voice carried just the right note of concern. Someone close to you, someone you trust, is working against your destiny. Over weeks, she planted seeds of doubt about his wife through calculated prophecies and private counseling sessions. Your wife's spirit is blocking your breakthrough, she would whisper during their increasingly frequent private meetings at her mansion. I see her making evil covenants against your success. Mr. OK, successful in business but naive in spiritual matters, fell completely under Patricia's spell. She convinced him to move out of his home, citing his wife's negative energy soon. He was spending evenings at Patricia's mansion for deliverance sessions that had nothing to do with prayer. Within months, Mr. OK had divorced his wife, transferred numerous properties to Patricia's name, and become a shell of his former self. Patricia added his case to her growing collection of wealthy men she'd manipulated for personal gain. After each successful scheme, Patricia would retreat to her private chambers, counting her profits while sipping expensive wine. These weren't just victories of manipulation, they were sacrifices to the Marine Kingdom, each broken life and shattered family feeding the dark powers that fueled her empire. And still, her congregation grew, each new victim unaware they were walking into the coils of a serpent disguised as a shepherdess. Elizabeth crouched behind the thick bushes near Patricia's mansion, her heart pounding against her ribs. The night air was heavy with moisture, and mosquitoes whined around her ears, but she didn't dare move. For weeks, she had been building a case against Mama See It All, and tonight might finally reveal the truth she sought. Her journey had started with small observations: the crippled man she'd seen walking in the market, the way Patricia's prophecies always seemed to target the wealthy members of the congregation. As a former investigative journalist, Elizabeth knew how to connect dots others missed. She'd started keeping detailed records. Her notebook was filled with dates, times, and amounts of the special offerings Patricia demanded. She'd photographed the same actors playing different roles in healing services, documented how the holy water scheme worked. Just yesterday, she'd overheard Patricia's assistants, Felix and Linda, laughing about the jerrycan scam. Just a spoonful of salt and sugar, Linda had giggled, and they think it's miracle water. But nothing had prepared Elizabeth for what she was about to witness. As midnight approached, she watched Patricia emerge from her mansion, moving with an unnatural grace toward the river. Elizabeth raised her phone, ready to record, then nearly dropped it at what she saw. Patricia's transformation began with a shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then her skin began to change, scales emerging in the moonlight. Elizabeth pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a scream as Patricia's legs fused into a serpentine tail. The creature that had been Patricia slipped into the river with barely a ripple. With trembling hands, Elizabeth documented everything. She added it to her growing file of evidence: photos of fake healing props stored in the church basement, recordings of Patricia's aides discussing their schemes, bank statements showing mysterious transfers to offshore accounts. The jerrycan blessing scam had been particularly brazen. Elizabeth had watched as hundreds of believers left their water containers for blessing, only for Patricia's workers to add simple salt and sugar when no one was looking. The slight taste change convinces them it's holy, Felix had explained to a new worker, unaware of Elizabeth's presence nearby. She'd tracked the fake healing performances too. The same blind man had been healed in 3 different churches across the city. The crippled woman who dramatically threw away her crutches was actually a struggling actress paid to perform every Sunday. But the financial manipulation was the most heartbreaking. Elizabeth had spreadsheets full of families who'd lost their savings to Patricia's demands for special seeds and breakthrough offerings. One elderly woman had even sold her house, believing Patricia's prophecy that a bigger blessing was coming. As Elizabeth slipped away from the riverside that night, she knew she finally had enough evidence. The truth about Mama See It All would soon be revealed to the world. Yet she couldn't shake the chill that ran down her spine. She had just witnessed something beyond mere fraud. She was dealing with powers darker than she'd ever imagined, and she knew that exposing Patricia would come at a terrible risk. The Sunday morning air crackled with tension as Elizabeth walked into Holy Ground Ministries for what she knew would be the last time. Her evidence was already in the hands of 3 major news outlets, set to break at noon. In her purse, her phone held videos that would shatter the carefully constructed empire of Mama See It All. Patricia stood at the altar, resplendent in white and gold, but her eyes locked onto Elizabeth with serpentine intensity. The usual opening prayers fell away as Patricia suddenly pointed a manicured finger toward Elizabeth. "Come forward," my daughter. Patricia's voice carried its usual honey-sweet tone, but Elizabeth heard the venom beneath. "The Spirit shows me you carry a heavy burden." The congregation watched entranced as Elizabeth walked down the center aisle. Her steps were steady despite her racing heart. As she reached the altar, Patricia placed a cold hand on her forehead, leaning close to whisper in her ear. "You're playing with forces you don't understand, child." Patricia's breath was ice against Elizabeth's skin. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Back away now, or what happens next will be your doing." But Elizabeth stood her ground, looking directly into Patricia's eyes. "The only thing buried here is the truth," she replied, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "And it's about to be resurrected." As if on cue, phones throughout the congregation began buzzing. News alerts flashed across screens: videos of Patricia's midnight transformation, documented evidence of fake healings, financial records showing millions in unexplained offshore transfers. The headlines screamed, "Mama See It All, the serpent in the pulpit." Chaos erupted. Someone projected one of the news sites onto the church's large screen, and Patricia's serpentine form played in high definition for all to see. Screams filled the air as congregants rushed for the exits, years of faith crumbling in seconds. Patricia's facade finally cracked, her face contorted with rage, scales rippling beneath her skin as her true nature fought to emerge. "You fool," she hissed at Elizabeth, her eyes glowing with otherworldly fury. "You have no idea what you've done." But it was too late. More evidence poured in as former staff members, encouraged by Elizabeth's expose, came forward with their own stories. Videos of actors practicing their fake healings went viral. Bank records revealed the extent of Patricia's wealth, built on the broken dreams of her followers. The mighty Mama See-It-All's empire crumbled in hours. By sunset, the church stood empty except for a few shell-shocked believers trying to process their years of devotion to a lie. Police cars surrounded the building, but Patricia had vanished. Some said they saw something slither into the river behind her mansion, never to be seen again. Elizabeth stayed until the end, offering comfort to the devastated congregation members. Many wept, not just for their lost money and time, but for their shattered faith. Yet, as the sun set on Holy Ground Ministries for the final time, there was also a sense of liberation in the air. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally set them free. A week after Patricia's disappearance, Elizabeth stood before the remnants of Holy Ground Ministries congregation. They gathered not in the grand church building, which now stood empty and sealed by police, but in a simple community hall. Sunlight streamed through plain glass windows so different from the ornate surroundings they'd grown used to. Elizabeth looked out at the faces before her, some still angry, others lost, many bearing the hollow look of those whose faith had been deeply shaken. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I see the pain in your eyes," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hushed room. "I understand the betrayal you feel. For years we believed we were part of something divine, something pure. Instead, we found ourselves entangled in a web of darkness." An elderly woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. She had sold her home on Patricia's prophecy of a greater blessing to come. Next to her sat a young man who had postponed his wedding to pay for a deliverance package. "But here's what I need you to understand," Elizabeth continued, her voice growing stronger. "The existence of a counterfeit proves that somewhere there must be something genuine. Patricia's deception doesn't negate the existence of true faith or authentic spiritual leadership." She stepped down from the small platform, walking among the people as she spoke. "True servants of God don't demand your life savings for blessings. They don't manipulate your fears or trade in false miracles. They serve with humility, love, and transparency." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth paused beside a young mother cradling her baby. "We must learn to be discerning. Faith shouldn't make you abandon reason. When someone claims to speak for God, watch their actions, not just their words. Do they build their own kingdoms or serve others? Do they empower you or make you dependent on them? But how can we trust anyone again?" someone called out from the back. Elizabeth nodded, acknowledging the valid fear. By using the wisdom God gave us, true spirituality doesn't fear questions. It doesn't demand blind faith or threaten divine punishment for doubt. It stands up to scrutiny because truth by its nature remains true even under examination. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, Elizabeth concluded her message with hope. "We've been through darkness, but we've emerged stronger, wiser. Let this experience not harden your hearts but sharpen your discernment. There are genuine spiritual leaders out there, humble men and women who serve God by serving others, who live the truth they preach." She looked around the room one final time. Our story will protect others from falling into similar traps. And though we've been deceived, we haven't been defeated. Sometimes, losing a false faith is the first step toward finding something real. As people began to rise from their seats, many with lighter expressions than when they'd arrived, Elizabeth saw something she hadn't witnessed in a long time: genuine hope replacing blind faith, and wisdom taking root where fear had once ruled. The truth had indeed set them free.